The day I realized I couldn't afford to stay married. I didn't know my marriage was already over. The day I stood in the pharmacy aisle, 7 months pregnant, staring at a $60 pregnancy pillow like it was some kind of luxury sports car. My lower back was throbbing. My ankles were swollen. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours in weeks. The fluorescent lights above me felt too bright, too sharp, like they were exposing something I didn't want to admit. Not that I was tired, not that I was scared, but that I was broke. Broke while married to a man who owned his own accounting firm. Broke while living in a house with granite countertops and a 2-car garage. Broke while carrying his child. I picked up the pillow, turned it over, checked the price again. $59.99. I started doing math in my head. If I skipped lunch for 2 weeks, if I didn't replace my worn-out shoes, if I delayed my car payment just a few more days, I could afford it, but I shouldn't have had to calculate whether I deserved sleep while pregnant. That was the moment something inside me shifted, because this wasn't about a pillow. It wasn't about vitamins, or maternity clothes, or $45 copays. It was about standing alone in a marriage where every dollar was a test. And I was failing. My name is Lena Carter. I'm 26 years old. My husband, Gregory Shaw, is 41. When I got pregnant, I thought I was starting a family. Instead, I was entering a negotiation. And by the time I realized I couldn't afford to stay married to him, I was already 7 months along. That night, I went home with the pillow. He asked me where it came from. I should have lied. Instead, I told the truth. And that conversation became the beginning of the end. How I fell for stability and didn't notice the fine print. I used to believe stability was the same thing as safety. When you grow up the way I did, you don't dream about romance in the dramatic, movie scene kind of way. You dream about simple things, consistent meals, a door that locks, a bed that's yours for longer than a few months. I was 12 when my parents died in a car accident. One phone call, one hospital hallway, one social worker's hand on my shoulder while she spoke in a voice too gentle to be real. After that, my life became a rotation of foster homes, group homes, temporary rooms with donated furniture, and rules that changed depending on who was in charge. By 18, I aged out. People like to say, "You're so strong." But strength isn't always a choice. Sometimes strength is just nobody coming. So when I was 23 and working at a coffee shop near an office building downtown, I didn't think my life was going anywhere special. I was just trying to pay rent, keep my car running, and not drown. That's where I met him, Gregory Shaw. He came in every morning at the same time, right before the morning rush, always wearing a crisp button-up shirt like he'd ironed it himself. He ordered the same drink, tipped the same amount, and spoke to me like I wasn't invisible. At first, it was just small talk. "How's your day? Busy? You look tired. Are they working you too hard?" The kind of questions that felt caring. After a few weeks, he started staying a little longer at the counter, not flirting in an obvious way, more like he was carefully building familiarity. He remembered my name. He asked about my classes when he noticed I was studying between customers. He laughed at my jokes. One morning he said, "You're smarter than this place. What do you want to do long term?" No one had asked me that in years. I shrugged, embarrassed. "Just something better." He nodded like he understood. "You'll get it. You just need structure, a plan." A plan. That word hit me like warmth, because nobody ever offered me a plan before. People offered me advice, or pity, or criticism, but he offered certainty. He asked me out a few days later, coffee after my shift. I said yes, even though I was nervous. He showed up exactly on time. He asked questions like he was genuinely interested, not just trying to fill silence. He told me about his accounting firm, how he'd built it from nothing, how he valued discipline, effort, personal responsibility. He said it like a philosophy, like he had figured out the formula for life. And I admired him for it. Because when you've spent years surviving chaos, you start to worship control. Things moved quickly after that. He sent good morning texts. He remembered small details. He brought me lunch at work once, a salad and a bottled smoothie, and said, "You deserve to eat well." He listened when I told him about foster care, but he never made it weird. He didn't ask for messy details. He just said quietly, "You didn't have anyone looking out for you. That changes now." That sentence was dangerous, because it sounded like love. Within 6 months, I was living with him. It felt like stepping into another world. His house was clean in a way mine never had been. Not just tidy, controlled. Everything had a place. His pantry was labeled. His bills were filed. His calendar was color-coded. Even his socks were folded in stacks that looked like they belonged in a store display. At first, I thought it was impressive. Then, a few weeks before we got married, he sat me down at the dining table like he was about to do my taxes. He laid out printed spreadsheets. Actual spreadsheets. He said, "We need to talk finances. Marriage doesn't work without clarity." I remember smiling nervously and saying, "Okay, sure." He explained his system like it was a gift. He made significantly more than I did, close to 6 figures. I made around $30,000 a year at the coffee shop. So he said he would cover 70% of the mortgage and utilities since he earned more. I would cover 30% plus half of everything else. And then he added, very calmly, like it was obvious, "All personal expenses remain separate." I blinked. Personal expenses like what? He counted them off with a pen, tapping the paper. My car, your car, clothes, medical bills, entertainment, meals with friends, anything you use for yourself. I laughed a little because I thought he was joking. He didn't laugh back. Then came the app. He had me download an app where I had to photograph receipts for any shared purchase. He said he would review them every Sunday, categorize them, highlight what counted as shared versus personal, and reimburse me for exactly half of the shared portion. He gave an example like he'd rehearsed it. If you buy dish soap and shampoo in the same trip, dish soap is shared, shampoo is personal because only you use it. I stared at him. That sounded intense. But then he said something that made me swallow my discomfort. This is how responsible adults avoid resentment. This way, nobody feels used. Used. That word mattered to him. And I didn't want to be the kind of woman who used a man. I didn't have parents to teach me how marriage finances worked. I didn't have anyone to tell me what was normal. So I agreed. Because I thought agreeing meant I was mature. Because I thought structure meant security. To make it fair, I took on most of the house responsibilities. I did the grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, laundry. I kept track of what we needed. I made sure his shirts were dry cleaned. I restocked his protein bars. I learned what kind of coffee beans he liked. Gregory would come home, eat, nod approvingly, and say, "See, this is teamwork." And for a while, I believed him. Then last year, he started talking about a baby. He brought it up casually at first, like a future detail. "We should start our family soon. We aren't getting younger. My parents would love grandkids." I wasn't sure I was ready. Not emotionally, not financially, not in any way that felt stable in my gut. But he kept bringing it up. And every time I hesitated, he would tilt his head and say, "What are you afraid of? We have everything we need." And on paper, he was right. House, marriage, job, insurance. So I tried to trust the paper. He promised me, "Baby expenses will be split 50-50. That's fair. We both want this." I wanted to believe him. Because if the man who preached responsibility couldn't be responsible for his own child, then what was I doing there? 4 months into trying, I got pregnant. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor staring at the test until my hands shook. When I showed him, he hugged me and said, "Good. Now we're building something real." I thought that meant love. I didn't realize it also meant a new category, a new set of rules. And I didn't know yet that the first time I would truly understand what kind of marriage I was in would be a $45 copay. The first signs of control that I missed. In the first few weeks of my pregnancy, things were calm. I had the usual pregnancy symptoms: morning sickness, fatigue, a few weird cravings, but mostly, I felt hopeful. Gregory was excited too. He painted the nursery, picked out a crib, and did all the things a good father-to-be was supposed to do. At first, it seemed like everything was falling into place, but the first cracks in the facade started appearing when I had my first appointment. It was just an 8-week checkup, a simple ultrasound to confirm the pregnancy was progressing. The copay was $45. When I came home and handed Gregory the receipt, expecting him to hand over his share of the bill, his face hardened. "Why are you showing this to me?" he asked, his voice cold. I blinked, confused. "It's for the appointment, Gregory, the copay. For the baby." He sighed, glancing at the receipt. "This is for your health, not the baby's," he said. "You're the one getting checked out, not the baby." I stared at him. Was he serious? "It's still a pregnancy-related cost," I protested. "We're paying for this together, like we said we would." "No," he replied flatly. "This is your health, Lena, not the baby's. You have to understand the difference, and you should be more careful about categorizing these things correctly." I felt a knot in my stomach. Was he really questioning whether this was a shared expense? How could he be so cold? I had expected him to be involved, to be supportive. But in that moment, it felt like the only thing he was concerned about was money. I forced a smile and nodded. "Okay, I'll handle it." But something had changed. I didn't want to admit it to myself yet, but I felt like I was starting to drown under the weight of this system he had created. As the weeks went on, the pattern continued. My pregnancy expenses kept mounting. Prenatal vitamins, maternity clothes, additional doctor's visits, but every time I presented a receipt, he scrutinized it like it was a crime. When I needed new maternity clothes because I had outgrown my regular wardrobe, I hesitated before showing him the price. But when I did, I braced myself for the familiar response. "These clothes are for your comfort, not for the baby," he said, flipping through the receipt. "Why aren't you looking for cheaper options? You don't need to spend so much." I tried to explain. "Gregory, I'm growing a human. I can't just wear my old clothes, and I've been looking for the most affordable options I can find." But he wasn't listening. The message was clear. These were my personal expenses, not his problem. With every passing day, I began to feel more isolated, more insignificant. I was supposed to be starting a family, but I was starting to feel like I was a burden. I was the one carrying our child, but it seemed like I was also carrying the weight of this financial burden alone. It wasn't just the pregnancy costs. It was his control over every little detail of our finances, his refusal to ever budge from his system. It was the fact that he could never just say, "We'll handle this together." Instead, everything was split down to the last dollar, with him always finding ways to remind me that this was my responsibility, not his. And it wasn't just money, it was everything. The house responsibilities, my job, my time, my friends. Everything I did was scrutinized. Everything I didn't do was criticized. The way I cooked, cleaned, the way I managed the household, it was never enough. He expected perfection, and I was falling short. When I told him that I was feeling overwhelmed with everything, he simply said, "You just need to manage better. We agreed to this, remember?" He was right. We had agreed, but I hadn't realized what I was agreeing to. I had spent my life fighting to be stable, to build something that wasn't just surviving. But now I was realizing the cost of stability had become too high. And the worst part was, I had no one to talk to. Who would understand? Who would believe me? I had created this life, this perfect life with Gregory, and now I was realizing that the life I thought I was building was nothing but a cage. Signs of control that I missed. He made me feel guilty for every small purchase. I had to account for every cent spent. He never asked how I was doing emotionally, only how I was managing financially. I was alone in this, even though he was right next to me. I was beginning to wonder if this was normal. Maybe this was just what it meant to be married. I started questioning myself. Was I being unreasonable? Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was just hormonal. But then the real cracks began to show. The day I asked him for help, and he refused. The moment I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when I finally hit my breaking point. I had come home after my regular 12-hour shift at the daycare, exhausted and emotionally drained. I hadn't had a day off in weeks, and the pregnancy was wearing me down more than I was willing to admit. As soon as I stepped inside the door, I noticed something. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I called out for Gregory, but there was no response. The kitchen was empty, no dinner waiting for me, no sign of him. I checked my phone, and there was a message from him. "Working late. Don't wait up. Left some soup in the fridge." I felt a pang of frustration rise in my chest. This had been happening more and more often. He wasn't just working late, he was avoiding me. Our communication had become transactional. If I needed something, I had to ask for it. If I wanted help, I had to beg. I reheated the soup, but the taste was bland. Nothing felt right anymore. I sat down at the table, my mind racing with everything that had been going on. The pregnancy costs, his refusal to help, his cold, calculating approach to every penny I spent. I had tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother-to-be, but it felt like no matter what I did, I was never enough for him. I felt like I was failing, and it wasn't just because of the baby. It was because I was losing myself. When Gregory finally came home hours later, he barely looked at me. He went straight to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and collapsed on the couch without saying a word. The silence between us was suffocating. I could feel the distance stretching between us, growing wider every day. I knew I needed to talk to him, but I didn't know how to break through the wall he had built between us. And then, as if it had been building up inside me for weeks, I snapped. "Gregory, I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I need help. I can't do this alone." He looked at me, irritated, but didn't respond right away. He took another swig of beer, then set the bottle down on the table. "What's this about, Lena? You've been fine managing everything. You said you wanted this baby. You said you were ready. I'm just working to make sure we can provide for it." My chest tightened at his words. You think I want to do this alone? You think I wanted to carry this burden on my own? My voice was rising, but I couldn't stop it. You've shut me out, Gregory. You don't help me. You don't even see me anymore. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. This again? You're overreacting. This is how it works. I'm providing. I'm taking care of the financial stuff. I told you everything has its place. I'm not here to play some emotional game. I stared at him in disbelief. You're not here to play some emotional game? I shook my head. This is my life, Gregory. This is our child. And you're treating me like I'm just some financial obligation. I'm not asking for a game. I'm asking for help. I need a partner, not someone who watches me struggle and judges every penny I spend. His face hardened. I've been clear about how this works. You knew the deal when we got married. Nothing's changed. You've got to take responsibility. I am taking responsibility. I stood up, my hands shaking. But I'm drowning, Gregory. And every time I try to ask you for help, you make me feel like I'm doing something wrong. You want me to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, and somehow manage this impossible financial system you've created. I can't do it anymore. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me like I was a stranger. And in that moment, I realized something. He wasn't going to change. Not for me. Not for our child. I felt like the world had shifted under me. I had been trying so hard to make everything work, to balance all the pressures he put on me. But now it was clear. He didn't care about the emotional cost of his decisions. He only cared about control. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about power. I'm done, Gregory, I said, my voice cold now. I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to raise our child in a house where I'm expected to do everything, and I'm constantly fighting to keep myself afloat while you sit back and watch. This is not how a partnership works. He stared at me for a long moment, and for the first time, I saw something shift in his eyes. But it wasn't regret or realization. It was anger. You're going to regret this, Lena. You'll see, he said, his voice low. But I was done listening. I walked upstairs to our room, packed my things, and left a note on the kitchen table. I didn't have the energy to fight anymore. I just needed to get out. I was leaving for me, for our child, and for the future I deserved. The decision was made. I couldn't afford to stay in this marriage, not physically, not emotionally. I wasn't going to let Gregory's financial control strip me of my dignity and my autonomy. I wasn't going to let him make me feel like I wasn't enough. Not anymore. And I realized that the only way I could rebuild my life was to walk away from the man I thought I loved, facing the consequences of my decision. I spent the next few days in a haze. There was no moment of relief, no triumphant feeling of I did it. Instead, there was silence, the kind of silence that's thick with the weight of what's been left unsaid. I stayed at my sister's place, not because I had anywhere else to go, but because I couldn't bear to be alone. I needed to keep my mind busy, my hands occupied. Every time I stopped to think, the gravity of what I had done hit me all over again. I had left Gregory. I had walked out of the life we had built together. But deep down, I knew it was the only choice I had. Still, it didn't make it easier. Every night, I woke up in a cold sweat, wondering if I had made a mistake, if I had overreacted. I kept replaying the last conversation in my head, looking for the moment where things had gone wrong, trying to figure out where I had failed. The feeling of guilt was suffocating, and it wasn't just because I had left him. It was because I had failed at keeping my family intact. I had promised myself that when I got pregnant, I would give my child the stability I never had. And now I was facing the reality that my child was going to grow up in 2 homes, not 1. But there was another feeling too. It was fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what the future held for me and Emma. Fear of how this would affect her, how she would grow up in a broken home. And then there was the anger. The anger at Gregory for putting me in this position in the first place. The anger at myself for not seeing the red flags sooner. The anger at the man I had once trusted, who had turned my life into a financial battleground. I couldn't believe that all of this, the stress, the sacrifices, the constant second-guessing, had been for nothing. But the worst part? The worst part was realizing that I had been so desperate to keep the peace, to keep things perfect, that I had allowed myself to be completely drained of every ounce of self-worth. I had let Gregory's financial system control me to the point where I was suffocating in it. And now that I was free, I didn't know who I was without it. I went to a therapist shortly after I left. It wasn't something I had planned on doing, but I was barely holding it together. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror without feeling ashamed. She asked me the first time we met, "Why did you stay so long?" I didn't have a good answer. There wasn't a simple explanation for why I had put up with it. Love? I suggested, my voice cracking. Love shouldn't cost you your dignity, she said gently. Love shouldn't make you feel like you're drowning. I sat there in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. It was the first time anyone had told me that what I had endured wasn't normal, that what Gregory had done wasn't okay. But it still felt like I was the one who was failing, like I was the one who had messed everything up. I kept hearing Gregory's voice in my head. You'll regret this. But I wasn't sure if I would. Not anymore. I still had to figure out what came next. What kind of future would Emma and I have? Could I rebuild? Could I find happiness again, even if it meant starting from scratch? Could I learn to trust myself again? I didn't have those answers, but I knew one thing. I was going to find out. The first time I saw Gregory after I left was the hardest. He showed up at my sister's house, standing at the doorstep like he was just a concerned husband trying to get his family back. But it wasn't concern I saw in his eyes, it was anger. Anger that I had dared to leave him. Anger that I had dared to question the life he had built for us. I couldn't let myself feel sorry for him anymore. I couldn't let him manipulate me back into his world of control. When I looked at him, I felt nothing. Just a hollow sense of relief. It was over. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But in that moment, I felt like I was finally starting to breathe again. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew this. I wasn't going back. Not to him, not to the life I had built with him. I was going to make it on my own. And I was going to show Emma that strength wasn't just about surviving. It was about standing up for yourself and knowing when to walk away. The consequences of walking away. The first few weeks after I left Gregory were a whirlwind of emotions. The relief I initially felt slowly turned into something darker, a constant nagging sense of guilt and uncertainty. I tried to focus on Emma. I had to. Every time I looked at her, I reminded myself that I was doing this for her. I couldn't let the fear of failure consume me. I was going to raise her in a better environment than the one I had grown up in. But the world I had left behind didn't let me go that easily. The day Gregory's lawyer reached out was the first sign that things weren't going to be as simple as I'd hoped. I had been preparing myself for a fight, but I hadn't expected it to start so soon. The email came while I was sitting at my kitchen table, paying bills, and sorting through paperwork for a legal aid service. I hadn't spoken to Gregory since that awful night. I had hoped he would give me space, maybe let the whole thing simmer down, but instead, he was coming after me, just like I knew he would. The subject line of the email read, Custody and Support Discussion. When I opened it, I felt a chill run through me. His lawyer was requesting a meeting, asking me to come to an office downtown to discuss the custody arrangement. I could almost hear the smugness in their words. They had money on their side, and they were going to use it to drag me through the mud. I couldn't help but feel the weight of that familiar pressure, the pressure to comply, to make peace, to keep things nice for Emma. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. My mind raced, spinning out of control as I wondered what Gregory's next move would be. Would he really take me to court? Would he try to paint me as an unfit mother? Would he use his wealth and resources to wear me down? But then I thought about Emma. I thought about everything I had already sacrificed to make sure she was safe and loved. And I realized something important. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. I hit reply and typed out a short, firm response. I will not be manipulated by financial threats. I will be at the meeting, but this time I will have a lawyer of my own. That was the first step. I needed legal representation. I needed someone who would fight for me. When I told Patricia what had happened, she was livid. She had been my rock since I left Gregory. She was the one who had helped me process everything, who had made me realize that what Gregory was doing wasn't just financial control, it was emotional manipulation. I confided in Patricia about the meeting, about Gregory's lawyer, and she immediately called her own lawyer, who had dealt with cases of financial manipulation before. I'll help you with the fees, Patricia said firmly. You don't have to go through this alone. Patricia didn't just offer to help financially. She also offered emotional support, something I never realized I would need so badly. But having her by my side, knowing I had someone who believed in me, helped me build the courage to face whatever was coming next. The day of the meeting, I walked into the law office with my lawyer at my side. The weight of the situation hit me when I saw Gregory and his lawyer already sitting at the table. Gregory's face was unreadable. He looked like a man preparing for a war he had fought before. He didn't look at me when I sat down across from him. He didn't say a word. The lawyer's voice broke the silence, cold and professional. Let's get started. As the meeting went on, I could feel the tension building. The lawyer made every attempt to paint me as an unfit mother, as someone who had abandoned her husband and child. But I held my ground. I didn't let their insinuations break me. It wasn't easy. I had moments when I wanted to cry, moments when I wanted to scream at them for daring to twist the truth. But I knew I couldn't. I had to stay calm, stay focused on the facts. And when it came to finances, Gregory's lawyer tried to use his income against me, saying I had no right to ask for more child support because he had always been the primary provider. I was ready for it. I presented my evidence, proof of Gregory's hidden accounts, of the times he had manipulated the family finances. I showed how he had kept me in the dark about his wealth, how he had refused to help me with any pregnancy-related expenses while he was sitting on money I didn't even know existed. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was a victory. The lawyer looked uncomfortable as I laid out my evidence, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand. That night, I called Patricia to tell her how it went. I think we might actually have a chance at winning this, I said, my voice shaking a little from adrenaline. Patricia laughed, but it was more relief than anything. You've got this, Lena. He can't control you anymore. But I knew that the battle wasn't over. The legal fight would take months, maybe longer. Gregory wasn't going to back down easily. He was going to use every trick in the book to drag me through the mud, to make me second-guess myself. But this time, I wasn't afraid. This time, I wasn't going to let him win. The real battle had only just begun. But as long as I had Emma and my own strength, I knew I could face anything that came my way. The lowest point in the fight. The weeks after the first legal meeting were some of the darkest I had ever faced. I'd thought walking away from Gregory would be the hardest part, but I quickly learned that the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was the aftermath. The emotional toll, the constant reminders of how manipulative he could be, the fact that he was still trying to control me even after everything. And then there was the court date. The first full hearing was set 2 months after that initial meeting. I had been preparing for it, gathering documents, talking to Patricia and my lawyer. But nothing could have prepared me for the emotional weight of sitting in that courtroom. I had hoped that once the process began, things would feel like they were moving toward resolution, but instead it felt like I was being torn apart piece by piece. The day of the hearing, I sat in the courtroom, my hands trembling. My lawyer, Sharon, sat beside me, flipping through her notes, ready to defend me. But I couldn't focus on the legal jargon. My eyes kept drifting to Gregory, sitting across the room, stone-faced and cold. He looked like he was in control, like everything was still in his hands. And for the first time, I questioned everything. What if he was right? What if he could prove that I was just an angry, emotional woman, unfit to take care of our daughter? What if my anger, my frustration, had clouded my judgment? I had promised myself that I wouldn't let him make me feel like I was wrong for standing up for myself. But sitting there, watching him, hearing the way his lawyer spoke about me as if I was the villain in this story, it was hard not to doubt myself. The judge was listening attentively, but I could see his gaze flicker toward Gregory when his lawyer presented their side. The lawyer painted Gregory as the ideal father, a man who had sacrificed everything for his family, who worked tirelessly to provide for us, who had been the victim of my emotional outbursts. It hurt. It hurt more than I had ever expected. The words emotional outbursts echoed in my mind, reminding me of everything I had tried to suppress. But then the judge asked me to speak. The moment I stood up, my heart was in my throat. I hadn't prepared a speech. I didn't know what to say. I had been so focused on gathering evidence, on proving that Gregory's control had hurt me, that I hadn't thought about how I would feel when I finally had to speak my truth in front of everyone. But when I opened my mouth, something shifted. The words came out raw and unfiltered. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be fighting for custody of my daughter. I never thought I would be in this position, I began, my voice shaky, but growing stronger as I continued. But I am here because I am the best thing for her, not because I want to punish Gregory, not because I want to take everything from him. I'm here because I am her mother, and I will do whatever it takes to protect her. I could see Gregory's jaw tighten, his expression hardening, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing this for me, for Emma. I understand the importance of financial stability, of providing, but that's not what makes someone a good parent. A good parent is someone who is there for their child, who shows up every day, who loves them unconditionally. I've done that. I am that parent. The silence in the room felt heavy. The judge didn't speak immediately. It was as though he was processing my words. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. I realized for the first time in weeks that I wasn't afraid anymore. The darkest part of this journey was being forced to relive everything. the hurt, the betrayal, the gaslighting. I had to confront the fact that Gregory wasn't just controlling me financially. He had controlled my emotions, my perception of myself, my worth. I had been living under his thumb for too long, thinking that what he wanted was what mattered. But I had my truth now, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur. My lawyer presented the evidence we had gathered, the hidden accounts, the manipulative text messages, the way Gregory had repeatedly refused to share any of the pregnancy-related costs. But it felt secondary. I wasn't fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for the right to exist as an equal partner in my own life. As we left the courtroom that day, I felt physically and emotionally drained. I didn't know what the outcome would be. I didn't know how this was going to end. But I knew one thing. I had spoken my truth, and I had finally claimed my power back. That night, I sat in the small apartment I had started to call home. Emma was asleep in her room. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I pulled out the notebook I had started months ago when all this had begun. It had been my therapy, my outlet. I opened it and read through some of the pages where I had written about my fears, my anger, and my frustrations. But as I read, I realized something important. I had survived. I had made it through the hardest part. And no matter what happened with the court case, I knew that I would keep going. I would protect Emma. I would keep building the life we deserved. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew this. I wasn't going to let Gregory control my life anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone do that. I was ready for whatever came next, finding my strength. The days after the hearing were a mix of exhaustion and hope. It felt like the weight of everything had been lifted, but the uncertainty about what would happen next still hung over me. The court case wasn't finished yet, and I knew Gregory wouldn't back down easily, but the longer I was away from him, the more I felt myself growing stronger. I started to realize that I was in control of my own story now. For so long, Gregory had been the one writing the narrative. His words, his actions, his financial control, it had all defined my life, my choices, and my worth. But now I had taken the first step toward reclaiming myself. Patricia, as always, was by my side. She had become more than just a friend over these last few months. She was like family, and the thought of facing this journey without her felt impossible. She was the one who had stood with me when I was too afraid to speak up. She was the one who had helped me gather the evidence, who had held my hand when I felt like the walls were closing in. One afternoon, we were sitting in my new apartment, talking over tea, as Emma played with her dolls in the corner. Patricia leaned in, her face serious. "You've already won, Lena," she said, her voice steady. "Gregory might not realize it yet, but this is over. You've shown him, and the court, that you're not afraid anymore. That's your power. You're not that woman who stayed silent. You've stood up for yourself and for Emma." I nodded, taking in her words. She was right, of course, but a part of me still clung to the fear that Gregory's money, his resources, his control over the situation might somehow tip the scales back in his favor. Patricia must have sensed my doubt because she added, "I've seen this before, Lena. I've seen women like you, smart, capable, full of strength. Let fear keep them from fully stepping into their power. You've done the hardest thing already. You've broken free." That night, as I lay in bed, the truth of what Patricia had said began to sink in. I had already done the hardest thing I would ever do. I had walked away. And now I had to remind myself every day that the fight wasn't just about the court case or custody. It was about rebuilding my life, my confidence, and my sense of self. For so long, I had let Gregory's view of me shape who I was. I had let him define my worth through his eyes. But I was realizing now that I had a choice. I had always had a choice, and I wasn't going to let fear dictate my future. The next morning, I made a decision. It was time to start moving forward. The next court hearing was set for 3 weeks later. I had no idea what the outcome would be, but I knew one thing. I was prepared for it. I had the strength I needed to face whatever Gregory threw my way. I had started seeing a therapist, someone I could talk to about all the things I hadn't said out loud, and slowly but surely, I was healing. I was learning how to trust myself again, how to believe that I could do this on my own. I also started making plans for the future. I looked into a community college near my apartment and found a program I was excited about. I couldn't go back to the coffee shop. I was determined to build a career that would allow me to provide for Emma without ever having to rely on anyone else's control again. And then there was Emma. Every day I was more in awe of her. She was growing up so fast. She had her father's eyes. but she had my strength. I saw it in her every time she tried something new, every time she smiled. She was my reminder of why I had to keep going, why I had to make this work. That afternoon, as I sat at my desk, working through some of the paperwork I had been putting off, I heard a knock at the door. It was unexpected, but when I opened it, I was surprised to see Jennifer, Brian's wife. She was holding a small box in her hands, looking hesitant. I had not expected to see her again. After all, her husband had been involved with Gregory and Allison, two people I'd once considered part of my life. "Lena," she said softly, her voice quiet but sincere, I know this might be strange, but I wanted to check in. I know we've been through some rough things, and I just wanted to say thank you for everything you did, for helping me see what was happening. I don't think I would have gotten out if you hadn't shared your story with me." Her eyes were filled with sincerity, and for a moment I was taken aback. I wasn't sure what I had expected from her, but it wasn't this kind of humility. "Jennifer," I said, surprised at the calmness in my own voice, "I didn't do anything but tell the truth. You're the one who made the decision to walk away from Brian. You're the one who stood up for yourself." She looked down at the box in her hands, then handed it to me. "I thought you might want this. It's a gift for Emma, something for her to have from me, from a mother who's been through the same thing." I opened the box and found a small charm bracelet with tiny beads and a small pendant shaped like a heart. It was delicate, but beautiful. "I want Emma to know she has someone who cares about her," Jennifer said softly. "I want her to know that even if her father has made mistakes, there are people out here who want to see her thrive." I stood there for a moment, speechless, before finally whispering, "Thank you. You didn't have to do this." Jennifer smiled, a little sad but also peaceful. "I know, but I wanted to." As I closed the door behind her, I sat down at the table, looking at the bracelet in my hands. It was a symbol of something I hadn't fully realized yet, a new chapter. A chapter where, even in the face of betrayal, there were people who understood, who cared, and who were willing to help. I wasn't alone, not anymore. The final step of this journey wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I could rebuild my life, my future, and my family. And that, in itself, was victory. The consequences catch up with him. The days following Jennifer's visit were a quiet kind of revelation. It was as though everything that had happened, the struggles, the emotional turmoil, the constant feeling of being trapped, was finally starting to settle. Gregory hadn't contacted me since that first hearing. His lawyer was still persistent, filing motions, dragging everything out in an attempt to force me into some kind of submission. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew what I wanted. A life of peace, a life where Emma and I could grow without the looming shadow of his control hanging over us. That didn't mean it was easy. The court process dragged on, and the emotional strain of constantly facing Gregory's team in those sterile, cold rooms never really left me. Every time we went to court, I had to brace myself for the flood of manipulative statements they would throw at me, the attempt to paint me as the villain, as the one who had abandoned the marriage. But each time, I grew stronger. My lawyer, Sharon, was solid in her defense of me, and the evidence we had accumulated was irrefutable. I had the bank statements, the text messages, the photos of the missed milestones Gregory had forgotten I'd been a part of. Each piece of evidence laid out the truth, making the web of lies Gregory had spun unravel bit by bit. Still, the most painful part wasn't the court battles. It was seeing how much he had damaged our daughter's perception of me. The first time Emma asked about Gregory was the hardest. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were at the park. I had promised her that we would play on the swings, go down the slides, and enjoy the day together. As we were sitting on a bench, she looked up at me with those wide, innocent eyes that still carried a glimmer of hope, of trust. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know how to answer. I swallowed hard, my voice cracking. "Sweetheart, Daddy's not coming home. We're not living together anymore." She frowned, her little brow furrowing. "But why? Why isn't he here?" I had to pause, trying to find the right words. How do you explain the complexities of a relationship like the one Gregory and I had? How do you explain the emotional abuse, the manipulation, the financial control to a 6-year-old? "I know this is confusing, honey," I said softly, brushing a stray hair from her face. "But sometimes, even when 2 people love each other, they can't live together anymore. Sometimes it's better if they're apart. It doesn't mean that Daddy doesn't love you. He does. But Mommy and Daddy are better off not living together." She seemed to accept this, but there was still a sadness in her eyes. I knew that deep down, she wasn't fully understanding what had happened, but I also knew she didn't need to yet. She just needed to know she was loved, that I was here for her, that I wasn't going anywhere. And I wasn't. In the weeks that followed, everything started to change. I began to settle into my new routine. Emma and I got to know the neighborhood better. I found a local daycare center that felt safe, a place where Emma could grow and make friends. I started taking evening classes at the community college, working toward a degree that had always felt impossible when I was married to Gregory. I had the support I needed: Patricia, my lawyer, and the other women I had met through the Family Resource Center, who were all surviving similar struggles. We were a community. We were rising above our circumstances. Gregory's financial manipulation, though, hadn't stopped. I had suspected that he wouldn't go down without a fight, and he didn't. His company had been making more money than he had ever let on. My lawyer had gathered even more evidence of the ways Gregory had shifted funds around, claiming he was struggling when he wasn't. But in the months that followed, something remarkable happened. Jennifer reached out again. She called me one evening, sounding more emotional than I had ever heard her. "Lena, I need to tell you something." I immediately sat up, a sense of urgency filling me. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, then spoke, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to be the one to say this, but I think it's time you know the full truth." The silence on the other end of the line made my heart race. What could she possibly be talking about? "Gregory has been lying to you about everything, Lena. He's been hiding money. Lots of it. His accounting firm is worth so much more than he's been telling the court." I sat back stunned. My mind was racing. "He's been siphoning money off into hidden accounts for years. And I've been talking to a few of his colleagues who are starting to question him. They don't know the whole story, but I do. He's been lying to everyone, including you." I could barely process what I was hearing, but Jennifer's words were becoming clear. Gregory wasn't just manipulating me. He was manipulating everyone, his colleagues, his friends, and now it was all falling apart. "I'm going to help you, Lena," she continued, her voice firm. "I'm going to testify about everything. I can't stand by and watch him destroy you anymore. I know the truth, and I want to make sure the court knows it too." The next court hearing was a turning point. When Jennifer testified, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. Her testimony was the final nail in the coffin. The lies Gregory had spun were exposed, and the truth was undeniable. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me full custody of Emma, with no further interference from Gregory. The relief that washed over me in that moment was indescribable. I had fought for this. I had fought for Emma, and in the end, I had won. Things with Gregory didn't end easily. He made one final attempt to undermine me, filing for visitation rights. But it was clear now that his hold on me was broken. The case was dismissed. His attempts at further manipulation were unsuccessful. The final chapter of this battle was not about who had the most money or the best lawyer. It was about who had the strength to fight for what was right. And I had fought for Emma. I had fought for us. Now, Emma and I are building our new life. I'm not sure where we'll go from here, but I know this. We are safe. We are free. And no one, not even Gregory, can take that from us. The healing journey and a new beginning. Months have passed since the final court ruling. The dust has settled, and the weight I once carried has slowly begun to lift. It feels strange now, like I'm stepping into a life I wasn't sure I could have. A life free from the manipulation, the stress, and the constant fear that Gregory's grip would somehow tighten around my neck again. But this journey, this fight for Emma and for myself, has taught me things I never imagined I would learn. It's taught me that no matter how dark the road may seem, there is always a way out. There is always a way forward, even when it feels like you've been broken beyond repair. The first thing I learned was that strength doesn't always look the way you think it does. When I first left Gregory, I thought I was weak for not being able to keep our family intact. I thought I was failing Emma, failing myself. But now, looking back, I see that it wasn't weakness. It was survival. It took more courage than I ever realized to walk away from a life I had invested so much in. It took incredible strength to face the unknown, to step into a future where I had no map, no clear path, but just the hope that I could build something better. And I did. The second lesson was never underestimate the power of community. Patricia has been my rock, my confidant, my reminder that I don't have to do everything alone. It wasn't just her. It was the support of all the women I've met through this journey, women who have been through their own struggles and have come out the other side stronger. Jennifer, who risked everything to help me expose Gregory's lies. Even the women I met at the resource center who opened my eyes to the kind of emotional abuse I had been enduring for so long. These women became my family. They became my lifeline. I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't allowed myself to lean on them, to accept their help and their wisdom. The power of solidarity is something I will never take for granted again. As for Gregory, well, he's still out there, still fighting his battles. But I've learned that his struggles are no longer mine. His control over me is gone, and with it, the life we shared. I don't know what the future holds for him, but I've realized that I'm no longer interested in his story. I'm writing my own. Life with Emma has been an adjustment, but one I am grateful for every single day. We are building a new routine together. Our mornings are calmer. Our nights are peaceful. We've learned to find joy in the little things. Her laughter, her curiosity, her new hobbies. Every day I see the woman she is becoming, and I am in awe of her. I still don't have everything figured out. There are days when the weight of what I've been through feels overwhelming. There are nights when I lie awake, wondering what Gregory's next move will be. But those moments are fewer now. I've learned how to stand on my own, and I've learned how to ask for help when I need it. I've learned to trust my instincts, to honor my own needs, and to refuse to let anyone, especially Gregory, define my worth. The most important lesson of all, though, is this. Love yourself first. For so long, I had tried to give everything to everyone else, my marriage, my family, my career, and in doing so, I lost sight of who I was. I allowed others to dictate my value. I allowed myself to believe that I was only worthy if I was constantly sacrificing for others. But now, I know that true strength comes from knowing your own worth, from standing firm in your truth, and from never allowing anyone to strip that away. Emma is growing up in a home where she sees a mother who knows her own value, who isn't afraid to speak up, who isn't afraid to protect what's hers. I hope, when she grows older, she looks back and sees a woman who wasn't perfect, but who fought fiercely for the life she deserved. And I hope she knows, without a doubt, that she's worthy of that same love, respect, and strength. So here we are. Emma and I are still writing our story. It's not always easy, but it's real, and it's ours. I don't know where this journey will take us, but I do know one thing. I will never again settle for anything less than the respect and love I deserve. And neither will Emma. The end of this chapter is not the end of our story. It's just the beginning. Thank you for following this journey. May you find the strength to take control of your own life, to stand up for what's right, and to always, always love yourself first. This story may be over for now, but I know it will continue in the hearts of everyone who reads it. The end.